what you'll see is this is a very big slide deck, and it has a whole bunch of numbers in it, and I'm not going through those numbers, right? We'll talk about them, but the slide deck will be available on the website if you want to go through the numbers in detail. As well, you can go to my website, minorminor.ca, and go to the report section. You can actually download the report at your convenience. So about 5 years ago, I issued my first summary, People Without Jobs, Jobs Without People. And it was issued in 2010, and it was built on pre-recession data. I didn't want to play around with the recessionary data because I wasn't sure how much I could trust it. And I felt that I needed to revisit that now that we're not out of the recession, but we're coming out of the recession. So my job today is to depress you. If at the end of this 45, 50 minutes you're depressed, I've achieved my objective. Right? And then you can listen to the panelists who have all the good ideas, and you'll feel better and better and better. So let's start with the depression. We're really dealing with two megatrends. We're dealing with an aging population, and to me that's a reality. And we're also dealing with a change in the nature of work. And we're moving away from kind of the old manual labor into a knowledge economy. And as a result of that, the type of education and training that's required is shifting. And we're going to talk about that shift in a moment. In order to look ahead, you really need to look at 5 things in my mind. You need to look at population projections, and Stats Canada does a pretty good job of that. They in fact give you 7 different models. I stick with the median model because historically it's been closer to reality than the others. Labor force demand projections, Stats Canada, Ministry of Finance, ESDC do projections there. They're a little softer. The population projections are pretty good. They're a little softer. Labor force participation rate, Stats Canada, they come out monthly, and you have an annual update to it. Educational attainment levels, I'll talk about that a little later in the slide deck. We do an okay job, but compared to our international colleagues, we do a horrible job. If you want to see how horrible it is, go to OECD educational tables and see how many times Canada has NA, not available, right? It's a crime as far as I'm concerned. And educational attainment needs, we'll talk about that, a lot of projections there. So in 2010, when I did the analysis, this is what I came up with. The red bar is the total labor force shortage, because what's happening as your population ages, labor force participation rates decline with age. So as a result of that, you have fewer people in the workforce. So that's the shortage. The kind of mauve bar are the jobs without people. That's people or employers who'd like to hire somebody, but they can't find somebody with the skills they need. And the green is kind of the increased negative social costs. Those are people without jobs. They like to have a job, they don't have the skill to do it. Well, what's changed in the last 5 years is quite profound. So what I'm trying to do is look ahead. I'm making assumptions. And when you go, if you're interested, when you go to the report, all the details of those assumptions are laid out. If you don't agree with them, that's wonderful. You can change the assumptions, redo the numbers, and see if your projections change things much. Updated population projections, there's increased level of educational attainment. In the last 5 years, Canada has noticeably increased its level of educational attainment. Labor force participation rate changes. Labor force demand projections have been lowered. That's bad news, but it's seen as good news. When you forecast there's fewer demand for jobs, and that's not particularly good, even though it tends to show that it's good in terms of a shrinking labor force. Canada Job Grant, we're moving to an older retirement age, 65 to 67, stricter employment insurance regulations, some targeted funding in disadvantaged groups, which is good. Need a lot more, but it's good. And one of the big shifts has been immigration policy. A lot of changes there. We'll talk about them. It's too soon to tell the impact they'll have, but and make a couple guesses. And this is what the population projection, that red line is your primary workforce, 25 to 44-year-olds. You see it gradually increases to about 20 or 21, and then it flatlines. And where's the growth? People like me, 65 and older. I mean, we're growing. Well, one of the things is labor force participation rates for older people have actually increased significantly since the 2010 year. You can see, and let's just the bottom of the slide, let's look at 65 or older. When you looked at the 207 summary, you had about 9% of the 65 and older who were in the labor force. By 2012, it had been 12.6%. And I checked the most recent data, which is January of this year, and it's 13.2%. So you're actually seeing an increase there. On the same token, look at the younger age groups. You see negative. And that's good and bad. It's bad in the sense they're not in the workforce. It's good because the reason they're not in the workforce, they're in the educational field. So in the long run, it's probably going to be good. And we have the same inverted U in terms of labor force participation by age and gender, where the female population has always been historically lower than the male population. And by 2031, we're going to have about 60% of the population in the labor force, dropping down from currently about 66%. Here's what the future looks like. The blue is the overall numbers of people in the workforce. The green is the projected labor force demand. And then those various shades of red, pink, and beige are the available workforce based on a high, medium, and low population growth. As I said before, I like the medium. I think the medium reflects reality far better. So the red bar shows you the shortage. So what you see is that if everything stayed the same, nothing changed, which obviously things change, we would have a shortage in terms of the number of people we need in the workforce compared to the demand. So what does that workforce look like? What kind of demand exists? Well, one of the things we're finding is that the nature of work is changing far more dramatically than it has in the past. The number of careers somebody goes through is more. The number of jobs is more. People are moving in and out all the time. About 25% of, this is a US study, there's not a comparable Canadian study, unfortunately. About 25% of their workforce over roughly a 35-year period were jobs that didn't exist prior to that. They're new jobs. I mean, just think, apps developers, how long have we had apps developers? Think about how long ago it was that Twitter came in, or even how long ago email became prevalent. I mean, that's been less than 25 years. So you got a whole bunch of new jobs. Also, old jobs turn into new jobs about every 15 years. And what I mean by that is if I hired a person today, and 15 years from now I need to replace that person, the skills, education that I needed for the replacement will be different than what I needed when I hired. The jobs just change. So how much of this new employment is needed? There was a flurry of studies about 5 years ago that tried to ask that question. And what they basically concluded was that about 3/4 of the new jobs will require some level of education training beyond high school. Some people had that figure as high as 80%, some in the high 60s, but somewhere around 75% would require something beyond high school. And I'm going to come back to that point later. Well, let's do it now. One of the major mistakes I made 5 years ago was talking about things only in terms of some level of education attainment beyond high school. That was far too narrow a definition of the types of skills required for the future. Because what we're finding is many people have education trained beyond high school and they're unemployed, or they're underemployed. Those are the figures there. You can look at them. So I redid my table. What is the skilled required? That stayed the same because there hadn't been any big new studies in the interim. The skilled force available actually increased because our educational attainment level went up. And then I was able, okay, Surprise. Surprise. Okay, visualize this slide. Remember we had the other slide showing the 2010 results that had the green bar, the red bar, the mauve bar. This is the same thing on the new analysis, right? It looks different, and you still have a large number of people shortages. But the number of unfilled people without jobs has shrunk because the educational attainment has gone up, right? And the number of jobs without people has shrunk. So the visual image is slightly different, and this is kind of the numerical basis behind that. If you look, and let's just look at the far right-hand column, 2031. In 2014, the labor shortage, we said a little under 2 million, but 5 years ago we thought it was 2.7. So actually we've improved that. And that's because labor force participation rates have gone up among older workers. That's the primary reason. In terms of skill shortages, big differences there. We thought in 2010 we were going to have a shortage of about over 4 million. Now we're projecting 2.3 million. Reason for that, educational attainment has gone up. But keep in mind, we're worried about that definition. Okay, so we still got a problem. Numerically, we have a shortage. I think we're going to have a shortage. And so we need to have a better trained workforce, and that goes beyond high school or better. And we also need more workers, and the way we address that is labor force participation rates. So who should we start targeting for labor force participation rates? Well, target the groups who are underrepresented in the workforce, right? And who are they? Immigrants, certainly a major focus of this group. Aboriginals, persons with disabilities, women, youth, and older workers. Those are the 6 groups that are underrepresented. So I was doing, and what you're going to see now, and we're not, again, going to get into the numbers, but a what-if analysis. What if we were able to do this? How would it impact on the number of people in the workforce? So let's start out. Immigrants, what are the 3 problems that are cited over and over and over again? Language, credential recognition, work experience. This is the most recent data. I pulled this for an annual data. This is 2014. And it shows what the Canadian participation rate is, about 81% and change. And then it shows the immigrant participation rate, depending on whether they're recent, old, moderate levels. The depressing thing about this, if you look at, we don't have it here, look at the same data from 5 years ago. It's pretty similar. It's pretty similar. It's depressing. So it takes about 10 years for an immigrant to reach the same level of workforce involvement that a non-immigrant would achieve. The government has said, well, we need to rejig our criteria for immigration. So you've had a whole plethora of programs come in the last 2 to 3 years. You have the Foreign Skilled Worker Program, Canadian Experience class that's targeted more to universities and colleges, bringing in international students, Skilled Trade Worker Program, and some others. But the common focus of those are that the person gets an immigration status based on availability of a job, so they have their Canadian experience. Their credential is recognized because they're given a job, and presumably the language skills are higher, certainly with the CEC's Canadian Experience class. So one would assume that labor force participation rates among the newer immigrants should go up. Let's wait 5 years and see if they do. I'm not saying they won't, I'm just saying I don't know. It's too early. But here are some assumptions you can make. If you take the current projections by CIC in terms of the number of immigrants that will fall under those new programs and kind of go out to 2031, you'd have about 360-some thousand people during that 5-year block between 2026 and 2031. You got 80-some thousand per year. if you were able to grow the existing, the question then is, of those numbers, how many additional people will enter the workforce? Well, you can't take simply the 355,000 because this is not an increase in the number of immigrants. This is a substitution mechanism, right? It's saying rather than bring in this group, we're going to bring in that group, and we think that second group is going to be more compatible to the workforce and we'll get higher levels of labor force participation. So what it really means is your workforce will increase by about 90,000 through those if everything goes the way we think it will go. And if we can improve our current labor force participation rates, we could get about almost 30,000 additional ones. The big one is that if we actually change the cap and you added 50,000 additional immigrants under the targeted programs, you could have over 600,000 additional people into the workforce. Aboriginal population, again, just going to the far right, what this is saying is, what if we're able to get Aboriginal labor force participation rates up to the Canadian average? You could increase the workforce by 100 and some thousand that way. If persons with disabilities could be brought in more fully into the workforce, anywhere from 130, and that's saying I improve it by about 25%, to over 200,000 if I improve it by 50%. Labor force participation rates among females, huge possibilities there. And there's some evidence to show that it can have a dramatic impact. For example, Quebec, about 5 years ago, changed their childcare policy in terms of subsidizing childcare. They had 70,000 additional female in the workforce as a result of that. So some of the changes that might occur could have very dramatic impact. And people over 55 years old, this was saying, what if we had labor force participation rates similar to the US for a similar age group? And you're going up to 150,000. So this tries to summarize it. The shortage, this is numerical now, this is just bodies. A little less than 2 million. If we took the lower projections, the lower in terms of change, we could add a little over 1 million into the workforce. If we were able to reach the higher objectives, we'd have about 2 million in the workforce. So our projected net, we're still about 800,000 short if the low objectives are achieved. And we actually have a surplus if the high objectives are achieved. And in our pocket, we have two other items. We have improved post-secondary efficiencies. If we could improve the system by 5%, we'd have 100,000 additional workers in the workforce. And that means things like, why should a 4-year degree take 5.5 years? And there are issues why. Some of it is monetary. People don't have enough money to finish. Some of it is square pegs, round holes kind of thing. But if we could improve it by 5%, we could add 100,000 people into the workforce. And we come back to changing immigration policy, we could add over 600,000. So I think the numerical problem over the next 15, 20 years is solvable. I think there are ways we can address that. Okay, so as was mentioned earlier, do we have a skills mismatch? There are 2 points of view, yes and no. I'm in the yes side, and tomorrow morning you can hear Don, who's in the no side, right? And at the end of the day, you can say, well, I kind of like the yes side or I like the no side. Not only do I think we have one skills mismatch, I think we got 4 skills mismatch. Because what we talk about is supply-demand mismatch. That's where everybody's focused on. We don't have enough plumbers, so we don't have enough engineers, we don't have enough whatever. We also have geographical mismatch. I've spent part of my life in Atlantic Canada, and there's people sitting in Atlantic Canada that have the skills that are needed in Alberta, and many of them, in fact, go to Alberta, but a lot of them can't. They can't for very legitimate reasons. They can't sell their house. They're in a depressed economy. They can't sell the house. They can't afford to take their family to Fort McMurray. So you have a geographical mismatch. The ones that worry me more because we don't talk about them as much are the underemployment. This is where we have people who have skills that are very good, but they're in jobs that don't require their skills. And the one that really scares me is the overemployment, because what we've got is people who are in jobs and they're not very good at what they do, right? They just are not very good. So those are the mismatches that interest me. Here's a whole list of studies that are kind of on the yes side of things. The no side of things, and I'll go to that first, is a bit of an economic analysis. It says, if you really had a skills mismatch, you'd see it in a couple places, right? You'd see lower levels of unemployment. Now, our employment has dropped, but we're still sitting at about 6.6. So it hasn't dropped as much as one would have thought it was dropping if, in fact, you had a skills shortage. I argue there are a couple reasons behind that, but such as the temporary foreign worker program and the fact that we haven't fully come out of the economy, or the economic downfall. But it's true, it hasn't dropped as much. Another argument against the existence of the skills mismatch is one that the economists say, well, if you're short of fill in the blank, engineers, IT people, whatever, the market always responds to shortages by raising salaries to attract people in, and when they attract people in, the salaries will go up, and that should be evident. When you go in and look at areas of shortage, you don't see as big a jumps as you would expect to see. So those are the economic analysis that, and Don will probably add more, he's brilliant actually, that would say, if there was a skill shortage, we'd see it here, 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 and we don't. These are the studies that say there is a skills mismatch, and I list them with great caution. There's a lot of vested interest on these slides, right? There's a whole bunch of people that want you to believe there's a skills mismatch because it's beneficial to them. So be careful about what you believe. And what I've done kind of in the next to last column, some of them are not really projecting shortages as much as retirement replacements, and that's a different thing. That's not the same. In my mind, yeah, there's a shortage, but if it was growth, I'd feel better about it. And the first group is a lot of those sector councils that were fighting for their lives for funding, so they wanted to do studies that show how important they were. Apologize to anybody in the room that was on those. It didn't work, but they showed a lot of shortages. The ones that are more neutral, OECD, they're showing both under and over employment, roughly about a third in the under and a quarter in the over. CIBC showing both skilled shortage occupations and surplus occupations. Certified general accountants, interesting study. 24% of recent university grads are underemployed. Not unemployed, underemployed. You think that's bad? In the U.S., it's about 45%. Crime, right? The millenniums are sitting in the basement with their parents, working at minimum wage jobs. So those are the kind of things that I think give me a feeling, there is skills mismatch. I was at a conference actually this morning in Toronto, and there was a bunch of HR people there as well. And the organizer said, how many of you people got a skill shortage? Virtually every hand in the room went up. And a little self-serving because they're there to find out about how they can get money out of the Canada Job Grant. But it was still a similar exercise. What interests me, and this will be a recurring theme, I'm just watching because I want to have a little time for questions. The nature of work is shifting more than I think people realize. Most parents want their kid to get a university degree. And as the president of the college and the vice president of the university, I hear that over and over. That is the path to success. Jane or Jen get a university degree. And that was true when 10% of your population was going on to university. When 30 to 40% of your population is going on to university, it's a different dynamic. So here are some studies that have come out in the last 2 to 3 years that basically say applied education is becoming increasingly important. And it's not just college. You know, it could be university. It could be a private career college. But more emphasis on applied education. I started tracking some numbers, and I wanted to update the slide for today. I probably made a mistake because everything I would have said, I can't say anymore because the numbers changed last month. Anyway, I started tracking unemployment about whether you were a university grad or whether you had a diploma or certificate. And the current wisdom is lower levels of unemployment if you have a university degree. Right? What I was interested in is what happens when you're in that younger cohort, that 19 to 24-year-old group. Right? And what it showed until last month was that university degree holders had a much higher, or at least higher, unemployment level than diploma and certificates. And it went back in Canada, that trend shifted about a year ago. In Ontario, the trend shifted about 18 months ago. Last month, it flipped. So I'm waiting for the February data, that's out either later this week or next week, to see if it stayed flipped or whether it's gone back again, because now it is more the way most people would have predicted. So what do we do? If we're going to try to make some changes, what do we do? We need to improve our labor market information system. Don and I fully agree on that, and you'll probably make those comments tomorrow. We need to do better career planning. We need to change our educational system that doesn't like change. We need business and unions to be more proactive in terms of the labor force, and we need governments. Labor market information, better data. We don't have the data we really should have to make those decisions. We went from the census to the household survey, we went from a 93% response rate to a 68% response rate. From a statistical point of view, you really worry about the continuity of your data when that kind of thing happens. We can't help, Ottawa's less of a problem, but you go into the rural areas of Canada and the population sample is so small that you can't really make projections. So Alberta, I think wisely, has paid Stats Canada extra money to sample rural areas. So at least they have a more robust database to build on. We need to sample more frequently. The National Occupation Code will be 15 years out of date when the new code comes in 2016, if it in fact is achieved by then. Better education training. Well, StatsCan had some problems. I don't think they're all theirs because their funding model is really a bad one. More publicly accessible data, like in the US, the whole data is just downloaded. You can go in, play with it, do whatever you want with it. And StatsCan's got a little better in some of their data, but a lot of it, because of their funding model, they want you to buy it, right? So, which it's not good. It should be publicly available. Better corporate involvement. Don Drummond, I was on the committee as well with Don. We made 69 recommendations to improve Canada's LMI, Labor Market Information System. Don may update it. Last time I talked to him, I think he said only six recommendations have been implemented. I put 10 just to be a little safe, but not many have been implemented. We also have different types of jobs, existing jobs, evolving jobs, future jobs. So now we get into career planning. So think of your children who may be 8, 9, 10 years old, and they're trying to make some decisions about their life and what they want to do, etc. It starts with having good data. We need a national system, and I'll talk about why. Everything is provincially delivered, which really limits that database. If you want to see a good system, go to Australia and New Zealand. They have very good national career planning websites that help anywhere from kids to people who are unemployed think through employment. And the system, I discovered this recently, the system, I kind of thought, well, you create a good website. The problem is what's good to you and me may be very different than our kids. The millennials are under a 3-click rule. If they cannot get to what they want in 3 clicks, you have lost them. Right? Where I'll sit down and work through the data and read it and go through it. They don't understand me, I don't understand them. Guidance counselors, core guidance counselors, and you gotta feel for them. Here's a university grad who has no idea what apprenticeships are, doesn't really know college, polytechnic programs, but they're given advice. What's the advice? Go to university. If you can't go to university, go to college. If you can't go to college, do an apprenticeship. If you can't do an apprenticeship, well, at least finish your high school degree. You know, there's a hierarchy there that we've got to worry about. The good ones, and also the New Zealand and Australia have the aptitude and ability tests kind of in there, so you can do a little self-analysis. And they're fully integrated. So if you say, well, I want to be a whatever, that is then linked with the education required in order to be there. And that tells you where you go to get the education, and what your entry requirements are, and how much does it cost, and what's your average salary, and what's your payback period, on and on and on. Career counseling really should be for everybody, because we have parents that have a view of reality, we have teachers that have a view of reality, students have a view of reality, and they're all different. Right? And we really need to help everybody understand things. Employability, I think all educational programs ought to have employability skills mixed in as part of that process. Again, we're going to shift careers, we're going to shift jobs far more frequently, and if we don't have kind of the basic underlying employability skills, it's going to make it harder to shift, and that's the current 8 or so that people obviously talk about. Educational reform, a lot needs to be done there. More applied programs. We need to think about, I know it's politically dynamite, but do we really want to encourage students to take programs that have no relationship to employment whatsoever? Right? My son just finished his PhD in fine arts, and I went through 8 years of pain as he went down that route. But he made me feel better when he said, I'm developing carpentry skills. All right. There's hope. But I think we need to look at that, and I would argue that we can still have very good non-applied programs, but we can easily build in a little, not a lot, of applied stuff as part of that program. But there is resistance to doing that. I think entrepreneurship needs to be expanded, more standalone compressed programs. We had problems with apprenticeship. We're making some change, but still a lot more to do. Expand that college polytechnic enrollment, move to a competency-based program rather than a credential-based program. And we need to shorten the interval between the applied learning and the job. Here's a mistake. As a college president, I fought for years to get articulated programs with U of T and York. And we got them. It was probably one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. Because what was happening is we had our college kids doing applied kind of stuff in year 1 and year 2, and then going into humanities social science course. So when they graduated, their applied learning was old, and their social science and humanities program didn't give them any advantage. So what happened? They came back to us to take a 1 or 2 year diploma program. The biggest growth in colleges and polytechnics in Canada is among university grads. So what we've got are a bunch of students who are running up debt, and then when they get out and graduate, they can't find a job to pay off their debt. So they end up going back to college to get more debt. Because they eventually pay off the debt, but it's painful. And that means we've got to change our understanding of what education and training is. It's not a hierarchy. It's not apprentice, college, university. It's different buckets that provide different expertise, and it's not a hierarchy. Okay, businesses need to invest more in education and training. Canada spends less money on education and training in the corporate sector than any other developed country. Right? Last figures, we've spent 1.8% of our gross payroll. U.S. spends about 2.5%. Europe spends over 3%. We need to spend more. And given the numerical shortage, I think the companies that don't spend more are the ones that are really going to get hurt. Improved co-op, internship, financial scholarships, etc., hiring practices. Governments, we need a national program. If you're going to bet that New Brunswick will take in the interest of Canada in the way it develops and constructs its post-secondary program, you're going to lose that bet. Everything's provincially focused. You can't blame them. We're the only country that doesn't have a national strategy. Even the U.S., who is a strong advocate for states' rights, has a national approach. Now, there's still autonomy at the states, but there's national. Government needs to accept failure. Yeah, I'm in favor of accountability. I'll always be in favor of accountability, but accountability has gone so far that it's stifled innovation. Why take a risk if you're an NGO or a post-secondary institution when all you can get is criticized, not praised? Take a risk, but the government's got to accept some level of failure. So here's why we have a national, and I'm still going to have 5 minutes or so for questions. This is why we do not have a national education strategy. Turn the clock back 150 years to Confederation. So we got Upper and Lower Canada trying to hammer out, what does this new union look like? Right? Well, this is what employment was, and all the terms that now would be unacceptable are taken from the data, right? Not everybody, a lot of farmers, a lot of craftspeople, a lot of laborers. Do they need post-secondary? No. Even you go down the list, fishermen, marine, miners, miscellaneous, probably most miscellaneous don't. So there wasn't a demand for post-secondary. At time of Confederation, there were 2,591 people in a post-secondary institution. Most of those wanted to be priests, teachers, or nurses. So why did we decide to let the provinces have jurisdiction over education? The answer is religion. When you go back 150 years, most education was taught on a religious basis. That's why in Ontario you got Catholic schools and non-Catholic schools, right? You see the same thing in Newfoundland, you see it in Nova Scotia, you see it in New Brunswick. So the religious arm wanted to control education, not for education, they wanted to control it for religion. And they felt they could control that at a provincial level rather than a national level, so education became a provincial responsibility. I think it's got to change. I think it's important that it changes. So we've gone through a lot of territory today. You should be depressed, but you also have a little hope there somewhere. But it's going to require a concerted effort by a number of people to work together on multiple fronts in order to address both the issue of numerical, the number of people in the workforce, and the skills side of the workforce as well.